Year after year, the World Schools Debating Championship gathers the best debaters from around the globe. This year's pandemic made that impossible, so we took it online. In this style of debate, there are two teams. The proposition team, which is in favor of the motion, and the opposition team, which is against it. Each side features 3 speakers giving 4 speeches. The first 2 speakers generally present constructive argumentation. The third primarily focuses on refutation, while the reply speaker summarizes the debate. For the prepared rounds, teams research the motions for weeks in advance. For the impromptu rounds, teams have only 1 hour to prepare after being told the motion.
Formula.
Hello, Senkai.
I'm Scott.
Hi, I'm Chaitanya. Oh. Hi, I'm Chaitanya.
Hey, proposition.
First speaker in reply, Angela Lee.
Second prop, Max Rosen.
Third prop, Matthew Answorth.
First opposition, Matthew.
Second opposition and reply, Gareth.
Hi, I'm Bharath, and I'll be doing third op.
Okay, thank you very much. Without any further ado, sorry, just quite quickly, well, how would you prefer your POIs?
Audibly.
Same, verbally for all of Singapore.
Okay, great. Let's get started. I'd like to call the first speaker from proposition here.
Sorry, I just got kicked out. I'm not sure what happened. But I guess I'm good now. Okay, never mind.
Can everyone hear me? Non-profit advocacy is in a very bad place right now, and it doesn't need to be. We have record level highs of donations, the greatest amount of funds at our disposal in a long time. But all we have to show for it are flashy we ads and projects that do more to assuage our own guilt than fix the issues they're supposed to target. On side proposition, we want to redirect the money to the right places for the right causes, and for those reasons, I'm incredibly proud to propose. I'm first going to get into a model for this debate, and then 2 constructive arguments for the proposition bench. First, why we create better incentives for charities to act, and second of all, why we improve their capacity to act. Before that, first on our model. So many of these lists already exist. So GiveWell, effective altruism communities, academics, etc., are already researching the efficacy of a lot of different organizations and programs. But in our world, we would set up an independent third-party organization that evaluates nonprofits on numerous metrics, including cost efficacy and measured impact. So this is measured impact can be things like quality adjusted life year, as in how many years of life do you give to individuals and how meaningfully better do you actually improve their lives with these nonprofit organizations. We would set up independent auditing of their finances and operations, and finally force them to disclose their numbers when otherwise it would be private and often unaccountable to the public. We would allocate money then on the basis of a lot of these metrics, and I'll take you in a second, to nonprofits with similar same issues that they focus on, but with better efficacy as a charity to act. And where it is not possible to find a charity with the exact same issue, we would allocate it to similar issues as that. We would focus it on the government from the place of founding of the nonprofit. So for example, the Oxfam charity is a British charity, so the British government would be allocating money of that charity to other ones that focus on similar issues. Before we move on, is this a point of clarification?
Would you also confiscate money donated to religious organizations for the states to distribute?
We think that if they're charities in nature, yes, but if they're religious organizations, not necessarily so. because of a whole another can of worms that doesn't deal with this policy. This is mostly about nonprofits with nonprofit goals. On to the first constructive argument then about why we create better incentives to act. I want to point out a huge problem in the status quo, which is that the charities with the most amount of attention and funding are unfortunately beginning to follow a quasi-corporate model. What is this? Red Cross, and UNICEF competing with the private sector to recruit executives and CEOs. This drives compensation up and means salaries for board members are higher than ever. And it has led to bloated bureaucracies because the charities that get the most donations are the ones with the biggest brand and name recognition. And to get that, they have a lot of advertising and a lot of staff dedicated to that. That means the allocation of resources in the status quo has been unfortunately coming at the active cost of effective aid and effective programs. And the problem here is that there's also a reluctance to cut down on this bloated bureaucracy, to cut down on staffing. Because when you start with all of these staff from the beginning, when you're bonding to work towards the same goal, it is very difficult. And it is a reason for why many studies have shown that often the staff expenses of charities alone are 50% higher than the private sector and take up a significant majority of the profit that they take. So bureaucracy and staffing alone has made that also the charities are incredibly unproductive. So look at the fact that after in the wreck of Hurricane Sandy, many Red Cross trucks stood stagnant because there were so many layers of bureaucracy, it was difficult to rally and organize the entirety of that organization. But the second problem is that often these charities are now more focusing on appealing to the public eye than actual real efficacy on the ground. So it looks like the founders of WE having a very insistent way on how to drive their organization that is not necessarily most effective, but what looks good or what they believe to be necessary perceptually. So it looks like projects like water wells, for example, that have been systematically proven to not be as important as just giving direct cash transfers, no thank you, to these regions that are more for show for their advertising to continue to get more funds that look good but don't actually solve the problem and are unfortunately unable to change because the founders and their ideology are still staunchly stuck in that. Most effective charities, however, we think structurally tend to be smaller. They're usually more principled. They look like organizations like Against Malaria, where they don't have a flashy website, but it's straight to work. It's about providing malaria nets that are inexpensive but have been proven to reduce deaths for children in the developing world, but are not getting the recognition and their reach is limited because they're not spending their time on loading up their staff to make sure that they get as much outreach as possible. On our side of the house, not only do we redistribute to smaller charities and finally give them that recognition from the validation of the fact that they are more effective as determined by the state independent board, but you also create huge incentives for these larger charities that have the most amount of funding to actually improve on that charity. Number one, we get way more transparency because we finally force their numbers in the public and understand where that money is going to determine efficacy, which in the status quo is being limited. Second of all, we finally make sure that there's an active reason for them to cut down on bureaucracy and costs, no thank you, that detract from their efficacy, because now it is actively coming at the cost of being able to keep their funds. This also looks like incentives on the part of large donors to put pressure on the nonprofit to improve it, because they want to make sure that if they're, for example, giving a grant of a few $1 million to the charity, that it actually stays with that charity. So it's more likely not only donors, but board members themselves have an active incentive to improve the charity to make sure that they can keep their money and ensure that their charity doesn't go underwater. Finally, we also make sure there are actual metrics on which they should be judged, as opposed to just the broad status quo where individuals donate on the basis of perhaps what looks most appealing, what is apparent most often in their feeds as well, and competition between different nonprofits to actually create efficacy means they're more likely to be productive. On that, so that proves why we get better incentives to make sure charities actually work better. Now moving on to the second argument about why we get a better capacity to act, no thank you. And here I want to prove in this argument that even if there's really great incentives on the behalf of charities in the status quo, the problem right now is that there's being an unproductive allocation of funds and that the money we're using is not used to its greatest capacity and to the best of its ability when it's being overflowed to some particular charities in the hands of a few. So in this argument, I want to establish it is most relevant in cases of emergency, when charities are needed the most. It's most relevant in times of urgency when an average individual is also most likely to donate to a charity. So this looks like after natural disasters and the times when nonprofits like the Red Cross, UNICEF, etc., are the most in demand. We think the flood of money to these charities in the status quo has been overwhelming and ineffective at ensuring that they're actually being used properly. Because in the event of disasters, we often donate to the charities we're most familiar with. So look at the fact that after the Haiti earthquakes, the Red Cross got donations up to $500 million. No matter how great of a charity you are, how great incentives or how good your intentions are, no charity is capable of effectively using all of these funds to its greatest maximum. And all to this day still, we still don't know know where all of that $500 million went. And in these cases, we think many smaller local charities would have been far better at allocating those funds and using them to their most productive means. But in the status quo, they're unable to get that allocation because all of the funding gets centralized in the largest, most well-known charities that have the greatest marketing and outreach. It is better on our side of the house for a couple of reasons. Number one, we finally allocate those funds and spread them out on the basis of maximizing the efficacy dollar by dollar of every donation we have. Not only do we get it to more responsible charities that don't squander the funds in the midst of emergencies like hurricanes and earthquakes, we also make sure that local charities that perhaps wouldn't have otherwise gotten these donations are ensuring that they have budgets to focus on the local small issues that are most effective at targeting. Second of all, we also have to make sure we diversify the kinds of advocacy we're talking about. So especially in the case right now, we're seeing many Black Lives Matter charities that are being advertised the most on Instagram are being overflooded with revenue and donations afterwards, to the point where they're not able to actually effectively use them all. There's only so many people that you can post bail from. On our side of the house, we spread it out more so that there's different charities in the same realms of issues that are better able to focus on them and ensure that it's not just the same ones being funded and overfunded time and time again. On our side, even if we concede that there's a marginal decrease in funding, we would prefer this world when we finally get the right allocation of funds, when it's for the right issues, and we finally get the productive, efficacious use of money. On our side of the house, we're very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech, and I'd like to invite our first speaker from opposition. Here.
Am I audible? All right, thank you. To a blind man, proposition would say that malaria research is more effective than a charity that helps the blind read. To a previously homeless man, they would prioritize an environmental cause over soup kitchens. To a parent of a child with muscular dystrophy, proposition would say that because research regularly comes up futile, they might as well give up hope. We reject this cold, heartless narrative on opposition. Our stance is first that we will not reclaim any money from charities for redistributive purposes and instead allow charities to gather and use their own funds. If there are extremely critical causes that are neglected, we will use taxation to create welfare schemes as most governments already do. Second, as with status quo, we will also have robust regulation of charities. This looks like mandating charities to release all their financial records, to respond to freedom of information requests, and banning misleading advertisement. So all that first proposition wants to talk about audits, about releasing information and becoming transparent, have already been increasingly mandated in status quo. That is not a mechanism that is unique to their side. No, thank you. Third, additionally, as with financial records, we will also require charities to publish the same indicators on effectiveness that proposition uses for all citizens to view. Yes?
Canada didn't hear the first part of your speech due to Wi-Fi issues. Restart.
Oh, my bad. Okay.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. Thanks so
No,
much.
worries, thanks for telling us.
Yeah, pardon me, guys.
Have they been reconnected?
Yeah, I'm back.
All right.
I guess we'll
Okay.
hope for the best, but yeah.
Okay,
So sorry about that.
3, 2, 1. To a blind man, proposition would say that malaria research is more effective than a charity that helps the blind read. To a previously homeless man, they would prioritize an environmental cause over the life-saving soup kitchens. To parents of a child with muscular dystrophy, proposition would say that because research regularly comes up futile, they might as well give up hope. We reject this cold, heartless narrative on opposition. Our stance is threefold. First, we will not reclaim any money from charities for redistributive purposes and instead allow charities to gather and use their own funds. If there are extremely critical causes that are neglected, we will then divert taxation to create welfare schemes as most governments already do. Second, as with status quo, we will also have robust regulation of charities. This looks like mandating charities to release all their financial records, to respond to freedom of information requests, and banning misleading advertising. That is why the mechanism that first proposition suggests about audits, about becoming more transparent, is not unique to their side, because that is increasingly mandated by the law in status quo. Third, additionally, as with financial records, we will also require charities to publish the same indicators on effectiveness that proposition uses for all citizens to view. The difference is that we do not pass a value judgment on the criterion of effectiveness that they use, so we would not be subjectively ranking charities like proposition. We also support third parties such as charity watchdogs compiling these metrics for the public. Instead, we would publish the objective indicators so that if citizens wanted to choose charities based on these criteria, they could. But if they didn't want to and donate to causes that they personally find meaningful, they can as well. We will follow 3 arguments on opposition. First, on undermining individual autonomy. Second, on harming charities. And my second speaker will argue that proposition allows states with nefarious intents to seize funds on political grounds. But before that, responses. The first argument that Prop 1 gives to us is that they create better incentives for charities to act. They say that in status quo, the problem is bureaucracy and excessive staffing and excessive money spent on advertising. First response, this is not true. Currently, charities are changing because charities that do act as quasi-corporations are shunned. For example, the Salvation Army's homophobic stance and mismanagement have been severely called out by the public, and they've significantly diminished following. In fact, their suggestion, no thank you, of publishing information publicly and auditing charities more can also be done and is currently being done. That is why charities now already face immense pressure from the public, from the people who donate to them, to become more accountable and more transparent. The second response is that they claim that board members will change if you rank charities based on effectiveness. But this is not true, because currently the only reason why board members want to join these charities is because by their logic, they can pay themselves immense salaries. If you rank charities based on effectiveness and all these benefits for board members go away, the board members will simply leave and the charity dissolves on side proposition. So they cannot change errant charities that already exist. The second argument is on emergency situations and how too much money goes to certain causes when there's an emergency situation. But the first response is, why can't charities use all these funds? I don't think so. Because their response about the Black Lives Matter receiving too much money now is just spurious. Currently, countless supporters are being detained by the police because they're suspected of excessive protesting and using violence. There's no limit to the amount of funds that can be allocated to bail all these innocent individuals. Proposition 1 claims that the 500 million the Red Cross got for the Haiti earthquake went accounted. This is not true. They set up a special portion of their website where they had live accountings for such a large donation because they were required by law to do that. And even if they had too much money, it doesn't mean that they have to use it all now. They can reallocate it and use it for future problems down the road. Moving on to my constructive arguments. First, on undermining the autonomy that individuals have over their donations. Premise, donations to charities are a morally praiseworthy act, not a moral obligation. This is because the moral obligations that people have to help the vulnerable is already fulfilled by taxation. Note, this means that the choice to donate is already going beyond what people are expected to do, and this is an act that is not bound to any restriction because it is not an obligation. The problem with proposition is that using effectiveness to restrict donations is principally problematic. 2 structural reasons. 1, effectiveness does not correlate to the importance of the charity. For example, the issue of mental health is never a certainty. The struggles that distressed individuals face can never be calculated mathematically on a spreadsheet. Charities such as suicide prevention hotlines probably won't be ranked high on the list of effectiveness on proposition because their work is so uncertain, but that doesn't make their work any less important. Using metrics of effectiveness is morally problematic because it discredits the important work of such charities and the choices of people to contribute to them. The second reason is because human dignity is born out of social relations. We define ourselves by our actions and the impacts that we leave on society. This is their money that they fundamentally have an autonomy over to help society. And proposition has no right to prevent this choice because people who donate are doing something that is morally praiseworthy. Not donating to the most effective charity is not a moral blame that they can be ascribed with.
Right.
I, for example, choose to donate to this charity for women in Singapore called Aware SG, no thank you, rather than to charities that send food aid to underdeveloped countries. Because Aware was what helped my mother take herself and I out of an abusive relationship. I don't think it is right for proposition to say that I'm morally blameworthy because I don't want to donate to the most effective charity. What is the comparative? Crucially, people are able to make better choices for two reasons. One, we already told you about anti-secrecy laws governing the actions of charities, and therefore all the examples about mismanagement of funds or board members paying themselves immense salaries is not something that continue to exist on our side. Second, there's already immense scrutiny over charities. People already gravitate towards the most transparent and competent ones that they're most passionate about. Furthermore, we already told you about how we can release information as well. Therefore, the comparative is not any worse on our side, but we are able to protect individuals' autonomy. Second argument on reducing the total amount of donations. And here's where to continue to clash with their second argument about excessive funds going to emergency situations. The premise of this argument is that when governments remove autonomy over donations, it is massively counterproductive for two structural reasons. One, because the majority of individuals are now far more unwilling to donate. As established in my first argument, the reason why people donate is because they have a personal, emotional connection to a certain cause and a certain charity. When people are uncertain over where their donation goes, that is when they're unwilling to give that donation up because they do not know if it will go to the cause that they're most passionate about. Now, we're not saying that people are selfish, but that emotions regulate how much these people choose to donate. That is the reason why Sweden has the highest rates of blood donation, because people get a text message every time their blood is used to save a life. If people trusted in the ability of the state to allocate donations, they can simply donate to state-run charities. But clearly, individuals who either don't trust the state, hold on a moment, or are donating for personal reasons cannot do so because they have their own personal connections. But before I move on, yes.
Most of the reasons for why people donate are because the issues and the causes are dear to their heart. Why are they likely not going to donate if it means we're still donating to the same issues and causes, just to a charity with better efficacy to get their goals done?
Thank you. I think that for the suicide prevention hotline charities, they are probably going to be ranked 100th or 200th on your list. None of that money that people donate to those charities will actually be going to the cause they support. So you cannot say that some of the money will still be going to the charity, because none of it will if you're only going to funnel all the money to the most effective charities. The second reason is because the majority of smaller or less effective charities now lack crucial funding to promote awareness about their case. Honestly, I don't think the majority of individuals now know about the majority of charities other than the ones they are personally linked to. That is why advertising isn't a dirty word, unlike what First Proposition wants to insinuate. Because it is important for charities to engage in outreach to increase awareness about their own funds, about their own causes that other people currently do not know. Rare disease charities, for example, that do research into cures. In Proposition's world, these are charities that will either die off due to people forgetting about them or lose their ability to help people to the degree that is required. Because we believe on our side that charity is about so much more than numbers. It is about hope and meaning. We are proud to oppose.
Okay, I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and invite our second speaker from Proposition. Here.
Can everyone hear? Great. The prettier Team Singapore's language was to describe charities that would, for some reason, be locked out of donations on our side, the more effective those charities tend to be. So for opposition to say that important charities like suicide hotlines, which last time I checked, literally talk people out of killing themselves, are the charities that are likely to be most effective in our world. Any charity that leads to an increase in quality adjusted life years, like Angela implied in the model, is likely one that will succeed. Sure, there are some charities that Singapore identified, like those that deal with rare diseases, which might have funding cut in our world. But we would rather save more lives on a simple level, that the pain that is felt by the millions of victims of heart disease and cancer are no less morally deserving of money than the person who faces muscular dystrophy. So Singapore can play with examples all they want, but ultimately this was about saving lives on our side, and that is what we uniquely provided. Two questions I'll ask. First of all, is this fair? Second of all, how does this affect charities and the donation amounts that they get? On the question of fairness, their argument is that an extension of individual choice is making donations, and that when they stem from personal relationships, they ought to be recognized. I want to make a couple of observations first. The first thing is that charities are fundamentally creatures of the state, and that gives the state significant control over them. For instance, states provide massive amounts of subsidies to charities by making it tax deductible to donate money. They also provide regulatory compliance. It means it's much easier for charities to basically control for legal liability. So there are a whole subset of ways in which governments of every country give an artificial legal and financial subsidy to charities, no thank you, in recognition of the good that they do. But that means that there ought to be a reciprocal relationship relationship, and given the way in which the state subsidizes charities, they also can fairly demand things in return. On the second question, which is about individuals, their claim is that it's an extension of individual autonomy to donate to the cause that you want. The first thing to note is that this restriction is not as significant as Team Singapore wants you to believe, and that is for two reasons. First of all, our model will default to donations to the same cause wherever possible. That will be the vast majority of cases, given that it's hard to imagine that there's any one particular cause for which there is no effective charity. In the rare instances in which money is moved to a different circumstance, we will aim for issues that are similar. So for instance, if you donate to a pro-cancer charity, but there are no pro-cancer charities for some reason that meet the cutoff for effectiveness, the government will likely reallocate to somewhere like a heart disease charity, which is relatively related to the cause. This means that people's moral preferences can be relatively accounted for in our world. But second of all, this does not engage at all, and they massively strawman their argument on the pressure that will be on charities. Their response to this was that board members will simply leave, so good charities will fall apart. Our claim was this: if you're considering donating $5 million to a hospital's charity wing, you're going to want to make sure that that money actually goes towards the charity. And that means that large donors are going to, no thank you, preemptively exert significant pressure on charities to say, hey, I'd like to give you all this money, but I need to make sure that you cut down on your staffing, excessive advertising, and bureaucracy before I can give you that donation, because that's going to ensure that my money, which I personally care about, goes to you. So opposition's argument about personal care is a reason why large donors are likely to leverage those things. I'll deal with their best case now, which is to say that, for instance, if you are an LGBT individual and you want to donate to a pro-LGBT charity, that should be within your right. First of all, the vast majority of your money will still go to that charity or that cause, as I flagged earlier. But second of all, your money will still go to doing a net good for society. We don't think we need to compare different forms of oppression in this debate. That if you face suffering, it is legitimate for you to want to donate to a charity that eases pain for others. It is deeply unclear to us why, on a moral level, that has to equally deal with homophobia rather than someone who is dying of cancer. These are very odd and presumptuous moral way-ups that Team Singapore is making that at best are assertive and at worst dictate the lives of individuals who are more vulnerable and for whom charities are currently not speaking for. So it was paternalistic of them on their side as well to make assumptions about which charities are more morally desirable. These things can be quantified, in contrary to their insistence. They say that you can't put a statistical number on the caring that goes to charities, but quality adjusted life years are pretty good as they go, because they don't just count the number of years of life saved, but they also count the enjoyment that you get from that life. For instance, they take into account happiness metrics that different countries have. Academics have been studying this for years upon years, and generally it is highly likely that quantification can be done. But second of all, their attempt to flip and create a counter model for their side undermines most of their case as well. Because if their argument is we should not make moral judgments about charities, and equally it is impossible to quantify the morality of charities, why do they want to create a government audited list that will make those exact same moral judgments and have that exact same coercive power onto individuals? So their attempt to steal our case probably proves that they agree that on some level these things can be quantified. And if they didn't think it could be quantified, they wouldn't have the state release a list that would coerce people into making these choices. So ultimately what we're left with from Team Singapore, no thank you, is a case that does not significantly engage with the extent of the analysis about the poor incentives of charities, the incentives towards bloating and bureaucracy and the ineffective allocation, but at the same time tries to steal our benefits, make their principle inconsistent. On the second question of effectiveness, but before that, I'll take the point. Okay, I will not. Second argument then on what is likely to occur. On charities, they make a couple of arguments. The first is a rather assertive claim that is quite underdeveloped at this point, which is that individuals are likely to donate less to charities. And their sole characterization here is a really odd assertion about the way that people care about charities, which is they donate because of a personal connection. Panel, think about when you've donated to charity. It's not always that you have an intimate personal connection with that cause. Sometimes it is, but that is not the inherent reason. It is because of the human capacity for empathy. That is the precise reason why you donate to charities when you feel empathetic to the cause. For instance, our team donated to the Black Lives Matter causes, not because we necessarily believed that this would always be the most effective charity, but we are touched by it. In their world, those donations happen too. People are touched by causes like Black Lives Matter when they happen, but that money gets redirected by the state. We channel people's empathy and personal connection, and we use it to move their money into more effective places. So if a personal connection exists, you'll still be enticed by advertisements. The final thing I want to note is that the worst case for this argument is donations go back to the state. And this is really important because this outframes most of their case. Donations are tax deductible. If you make $151K per year and you donate $1,000, for tax purposes, you make $150,000. What that means is that whenever you make a donation, that comes at the direct expense of giving money to the state. So in the worst case, when you no longer donate money to ineffective charities, that now goes to the state, which is likely more effective at allocating resources than an ineffective charity. So we would claim that if donations lower to ineffective charities in their world, that is an active win for our side, because then that money gets taxed and it goes to the government, which will allocate money more effectively. Some breast cancer charities in the United States only donate about 35% of the money they get. That is astounding. The state uses way more of those resources. So Singapore makes an argument for our side here when they say that ineffective charities will die out. Good. Those charity employees will be redirected to better circumstances. The money will go to the state and they'll spend it on welfare, which Singapore flagged as part of their stance as being a good thing. So we've already flipped this claim. I want to bring back Angela's content here that they don't respond to. On emergencies, they say that people will still donate during emergencies. Great. No one knows where to allocate resources. That's the problem in the status quo. You see a hurricane happen, you donate to Red Cross, but you don't know what precisely to do. And Red Cross doesn't either. The response that Singapore gives here is that, well, Red Cross can just hold on to the money and use it later. No donor will accept that because, as Singapore notes, they want quantifiability and they have a connection. Charities are under intense pressure to spend the money they get right away for the exact same reporting incentives that OP identifies. If they want to publish a list, there'll be significant pressure to spend money right away. So that's tense. But the second thing to observe then is that those pressures mean that you have trucks full of food waiting for no one in hurricanes because of the pressure to spend money and the need to gather donations. Ultimately, we proved that some charities are bloated. They have altruistic incentives, but it would be better to allocate money to the right places. Our model solves for it, and no argument about state abuse is likely to solve for that given our model. For those reasons, we are proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and call our second speaker from opposition. Here, here.
Can everyone hear me if I just speak like this? Before I move on any further, let's put some daylight between both sides of the house. Because second proposition pivots. He says, we're going to try as much as possible to donate within the same sector. Here are 3 reasons why that's problematic for their case. 1, because they significantly reduce their benefits. First proposition spends a lot of time talking about the misallocation of resources, how some causes are more important than others. That's a massive concession that individuals do in fact have the right to donate to causes that matter to them. It's worth noting that this doesn't lose them the debate yet, but it's worth noting that this reduces a lot of the benefit that they're trying to overclaim. Second, it's worth noting that most charities don't try to intersect with each other's actions. So within the LGBT community, there are a variety of ways that they can help it. Some do counseling, some do legal work. It's quite strange that charities will try to intersect with each other's alternatives. I would suggest that that's not a thing because most charities don't want to be overprotective or harm the very people that they want and get in each other's way. So this argument way up doesn't make sense. The third thing to point out then is that in the vast majority of cases, they can't actually say that one thing is more important than the other. Like, how is heart disease and cancer necessarily substitutable on their side of the house? This is a non-argument, and at best, they concede the vast majority of their house. The last thing he does in a fit of desperation is to say, oh, we crossed the house because we provided some level of judgment. No, we didn't. We said, if you have certain statistics that talk about the effectiveness of cash, if you have certain statistics that talk about light years, we can give this information to people. But we're not coercing anyone to do anything. It's up to them to make the subjective way of what's more important to them. So there's the daylight between both sides of the house. They can't run away from that burden. Let's talk about 2 things. First, are there right causes? And second, do we make charities better? First, are there right causes? Now, the core of the proposition case is a trivially true claim about the problems that come with charity accountability. Because if their issue is that people don't know enough about charities, the solution to this is to make them know more. We can make this information public. If they have audits, we can do this too. If they want to talk about Oxfam, if they want to talk about effective altruism, we can do the exact same thing. And given the incentives that they talked about in their second proposition speech, it's quite likely that people will listen to these and judge accordingly. But second, we actually get more accountability on our side. Because when people are more personally involved with charitable donations, they are a lot more likely to pressure the individuals and charities to actually make change. And in an era of social media and massive accountability, this is an extremely likely question. So what is the real difference then between both sides? The real difference is that side proposition is making a positive, normative, moral claim, forcing individuals to do it. What was their main defense? One, they said, but charities owe stuff to the state. This is a non-specific claim. We never talked about charities. This debate is obviously about the individuals who choose to donate, and those people already are taxed by the state. The next thing that they say then is, but at the very least on our side of the house, individuals are able to make the donation and make it right because we have the ability to qualify light years. Maybe you do, but it still misses the point of Matthew's argument. Matthew's argument is that you can't necessarily concatenate effectiveness. Like, why exactly is human dignity necessarily tradable? Like, why exactly is one life or another version of their life more important? We don't have to stand for the reduction in things like suicide hotlines. I'm sorry. If their claim is efficiency, it's often true that mental health issues are a lot more uncertain and therefore a lot more inefficient. My mother has deep vein thrombosis. She suffered a lot because of that. I'm sorry if my choice is to ensure that I donate to deep vein thrombosis foundations instead of on their side of the house, somehow cancer is more important. Because this nebulous version of utility was never proven on their side of the house. How is one thing necessarily more important than another? There is no nebulous notion of effectiveness that they have yet to prove. So at the heart of this debate, what matters is human relation. What is important to individuals is their right to decide the causes that matter to them. Because if there are important causes, the state uses that in taxation. That's our claim. What's left is individuals' right to define themselves based on what is important to them. So at the end of this debate, it's important that side proposition hasn't clashed with the vast majority of Matthew's material for dignity and choice. It's too late in third. Second question, do we make charities better? This is where they also have another unspecific overclaimed argument. They say charities have horrible incentives because they are bureaucratic. One, this is a non-specific claim. Often the reason why the Red Cross spends a lot of money is because there are often issues on the ground that neither side in this debate can lift, for example, corruption. So if their claim is this doesn't actually solve it. The best is to go in and solve those issues. But the problem that we identified is twofold. One, they significantly reduce the incentive of individuals to donate to these charities because people want to know that their work is definitely going to be confirmed to the point of the cause that they actually want. They say, no, this will pressure individuals to make sure that these charities are better. I'm sorry. The vast majority of charitable donations come on small donations. Like a guy who donates $50 a month doesn't have the ability to pressure charities in the way that they'd like to say. But second, if you're moving my funds all over the place, how on earth do I have any certainty, given the millions of, lots of metrics that they want to use on their side of the house, neither of which are confirmable? So I probably won't in fact donate. Are we saying that people are selfish? No. We are saying that they are likely to donate a lot less on our side of the house and willing to make that trade-off because more donation often means more accountability as well. Second, they misunderstand Matthew's argument. The point is, some charities do in fact require advertising. The reason why is because charities often have to make the choice that they force them to make. Either you reduce the amount of ad budget, which is okay, or you choose to focus on more effective measures. The problem is that many charitable donations or charity issues that are dependent on public awareness are destroyed on their side of the house, like mental health awareness. Before I move on, I'll take this point.
If Team Singapore's argument is that in the important areas, the state will provide welfare to people, how is Singapore's third argument then that the state will abuse these problems for corruption? The mitigation requires the state to have good incentives.
Okay, you should be a bit patient because I'm going to get to that and explain to you later. So I'm now going to move on to my team's third and final argument, why governments are poor actors to decide on charitable donations. Now, it's worth noting that this takes them at their highest point, assuming why are governments bad at deciding charitable donations? Look, we're not saying that we particularly love the state on our side of the house, but there are a bunch of characteristics that make states good in some areas and not others. One, there are often large economies of scale in terms of effectiveness. Two, there are often public goods that we don't necessarily or not able to incentivize individuals to do. And third, in many instances, people don't owe. On our side of the house, we get better donations because governments have more effectiveness in this regard. But when then do charities and governments become horrible? The reason is because in many instances, the point of a charity is to pick up where governments leave behind. And that's where there are three reasons why they are actually worse off. One, I can very much imagine Trump in their side of the house defunding the ACLU based on the nebulous metrics of effectiveness that they've come up on their side of the house. I can very much imagine Trump diverting funds away from Black Lives Matter protesters on their side of the house. So I think it's important. Governments are good in some areas, but in the areas that they leave behind, forcing governments to use this ability to divert funds is a horrible idea for the disadvantaged community. Two, the reduction in utility is important because if your charitable cause is less important or less large in scale, as is often the case with minorities, your economic effectiveness is a lot less because you have to deal with higher fixed costs and lower marginal costs. So each individual person you help is worth more dollars. They can use that excuse on their side to reduce it. But third, there is no real reason as to why governments are actually effective at making these decisions in many instances. For example, governments can be massively ineffective when it comes to dealing with massive layers of bureaucracy. The civil service often is absolutely horrible at making these judgments on their own, so we think it's much better if it's more direct. The point is the massive layers of separation they set up are bad in many instances. We believe that charity is about so much more than numbers, it's about hope and meaning we oppose.
Okay, I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and call our third speaker from Proposition. Here.
Sorry, just a moment. All right, can everyone hear me all right? Can you hear me? Yeah, oh, you said yes. Opposition says that our model undercuts our benefits. That is not true for three reasons. One, because even if we divert funding within issues, they are still within the broad category of what people care about. It might be true that people care different amounts about counseling versus legal work for the LGBTQ community. We still think it probably fulfills their baseline desire to cater to the vulnerable LGBTQ community. Second, because our collective action problem was about allocation within singular causes. That problem is solved on our side of the house. The problem was not just which causes get the money. The problem was specifically which charities get the money, and we get a massive benefit in those cases. The third thing I want to point out is on their bizarre claim that we cannot weigh up subjective issues as being more important than another. Look, we say yes, we can. We can say that charities that save lives and that make those lives better are objectively more important. And note, the logical extension of their case is that the government cannot fund welfare instead of healthcare and make these trade-offs because that requires you to weigh up dignity. Every choice we make requires us to weigh up dignity, and we think those are justifiable choices we can make. I'm going to chat about three things. One, will donations decrease? Second, even if donations decrease, do we get more value for the dollar, and why is that more important? And then
Point
third,
of information.
no, thank you. So, one, will donations decrease? Their argument is people donate because of an emotional, personal connection to these issues, and therefore they will not donate anymore when the state has control. A few responses. One, I want to point out, and this is a crucial line to note, people usually do not donate because they are particularly moral or empathetic. They donate because they want to feel moral and empathetic. The reason why is simple. Most people only do not have a sufficient empathetic response to other people's suffering to massively relate to it on an intense visceral level. We only feel our own emotions and we only care about our own emotions because of that. What is the
point?
No, thank you. The implication is that donation is actually in many ways selfish. We are ridding ourselves of the pain we feel inside, not because we inherently care about other people necessarily, but because we want to assuage ourselves of the guilt, which is a reason why people will donate on either side of the house, because they want to feel as though they've allocated their moral capital correctly. Response two, most people do not have a particular intense connection to a charity. They have an intense connection to a cause. It would be bizarre to say you have an intense connection to a particular charity. Like, why that particular charity when there are tons of others who are doing similar or the same work? Insofar as you still have that connection to the issue, we divert funds within the issue, and therefore the same funds should still exist. Response three, as we told you in first, no response. Most donations come after things like trends, like natural disasters, like crises. People do not donate all the time. They have other priorities in life, other things to think about. It only comes, the massive sparks in donations, when there are big issues that fundamentally arise. And in those cases, we think donations will happen either way because that is a visceral gut reaction to something bad that is happening. Fourthly, for those who do care intensely about a given charity, as we told you at the beginning, they will
Point of information.
No, thank you, to be more effective so that they get the state funding. So we co-opted the prop benefit here and got no response to that whatsoever. The conclusion here is that the donation change is probably marginal at best, and the case on which proposition hangs their arguments fall. Opposition, sorry. Second theme now on whether we get more value for the dollar. Before I go on, I'll take the POI.
If your claim is that there can be some objective metric to measure the extent to which charities save lives, why will your side still segment broad areas of causes when there are certain charities that you know for sure can save more lives than others?
Look, because we think it is reasonable that this is a way to prevent people from stopping donating. Like, we can strike a balance here, guys. We don't need to solve every problem in the world. We think that localizing it within the issues is a good way to not have the massive decrease in funding that your side is talking about and to get all of the benefits that we're talking about. We don't need to save the world. We don't need to make a massive change. We are making a big change, and we think that is valuable in people's lives. Second question, do we get more value for the dollar? I already told you that we can still get a plurality of issues where possible, but I'm willing to accept that opposition has a marginal increase in the types of plurality of issues they care about. Broadly speaking, though, I'm going to talk about two things under this clash that are more important. Firstly, on the incentives of charities, and second, on solving collective action problems. Firstly, on the incentives. We told you that they have a host of bad incentives to do things like overpay their executives, to do things like advertise excessively aggressively. Their response is, charities are shunned if they mismanage, so they have an active incentive not to mismanage. Response, one, oftentimes these are very subtle things, the ways in which they mismanage. It's about the amount that you pay to high-level executives, which is oftentimes not scrutinized. And here's why it's not scrutinized.
Point of information.
Because the public often doesn't care about these things. They do not have the time to cross-compare the efficacy of different charities in such a time-consuming manner. And crucially, if you buy their analysis that donations stem from visceral gut emotional reactions, you also have to believe that people are not putting in the time to cross-compare and evaluate all the different ways in which these charities are acting. The conclusion is that we need coordination. We need a list, and we need a list that people believe in and that they know acts in this way. So the good incentives that they talk about cannot co-opt our benefit. Second, though, on the collective action problem, the response to our argument is BLM needs the money. There is no limit to the bail money that is needed. The first thing I'd point out is that's just not true. Like, the amount of money that went to the bail fund was actually unnecessary for the amount of people that they had to bail out. This is a factual reality. Singapore can't lie about it. Second, though, they can refute the example. They didn't refute the crux of the argument, which was that we needed a coordinating force. That in the aftermath of crises that force people or motivate people to donate to particular causes that gain the most attraction, we need a state that redistributes to the ones that are more effective. Their response is charities actually need advertising and will crumble without them. The state list is now functionally advertising. It's how you get out in the public eye. It's how you make people know who you are. And crucially, when that list becomes important, and when people know that that list is the basis on which the government prioritizes allocation, people are more likely to care about the list. Whereas on their side, it's just this nebulous list that exists that nobody cares about because it doesn't lead to any pragmatic change. On their argument about corruption, two responses. One, we said specifically independent boards will audit this. They are immune from state pressure. And crucially, we will rely on academic metrics and a rich literature that exists. Note, their mechanism relies on public accountability and pressure. That public accountability and pressure is easier when the list is there and people recognize the relevance of that list. The second thing I'd point out is in very oppressive governments, there are other ways to be corrupt. Giving tax deductions to certain charities, not licensing certain charities to operate if you fundamentally disagree with their causes. So if there's going to be such a massive and non-subtle way that Trump is going to abuse BLM, for example, for this policy, there are probably other ways that oppressive governments would do so as well. What is the way? Even if donations decrease, our claims are more important for three reasons. One, because we've proven that donations won't decrease much. That mitigation needs to be accounted for. Two, if they do, those charities are not that effective. We told you that tons of this money is wasted. It's wasted in excessive salaries. It's wasted for funding of aggressive advertisements. We now shift the incentives of charities. Because no, the charities do care about charity. If they can pocket the cash in the meantime, they do that. Now they can't. Board members won't leave because they broadly care about the charitable issues, but now we create an active incentive for them to divert their money to valuable things. The third thing we pointed out and got no response is that charitable donations are tax deductible. If the donation goes to nothing, it is better that it goes to welfare, that it goes to healthcare through tax money. So even if donations decrease, we get a better benefit on our side. Thirdly, on the principle, two responses to their principle. One, their premise is that you don't have a moral obligation to donate to charity. I think that's false, and here's why. We live in societies and communities where we benefit mutually from one another, from our collective abidance by the law, for example, and we therefore have massive reciprocal obligations to one another. Sometimes the state fails, but that means you have an obligation to donate to charities for effective purposes to fill the void that the state leaves, which suggests to us if people have broad obligations to one another, and this is not just morally praiseworthy, the state reserves the right to redistribute. Second, because there's an info asymmetry. People cannot predict the types of collective action problems that we talked about. If they care so much about an issue, they might actually prefer our policy because it allows them to get more value for the dollar into that issue. Finally, we need to weigh up these property rights against the fact that people are suffering and that outcomes matter. We are happy to stand on that ground and very pleased to propose.
Okay, I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and invite our third speaker from opposition. You're here.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Great, thank you. Also note the team proposition. My computer tends to be annoying when I'm speaking, so I might not be able to hear you. So if you see I'm not even responding to your POIs, just shout louder, I guess. Sorry about that. Thank you. At the end of this debate, I want you to remember something Matthew said in perhaps the first minute of his speech, which is how much benefits of proposition's case are actually unique to the motion. By their third, you notice that the words reallocation of funds appears like once or twice, but the words publish the list appears so much more. We told you we were able to do this right from the top. Gareth clarified it didn't cross the House. So at the end of this debate, in judging this debate, you need to ask how much of their benefits were actually unique to the motion. We told you not much. I'm going to talk about three things in this speech. First, the moral right to choice. Second, do they decrease the total amount of charitable donations? Third, do they really save more lives? First, our principal claim is that people have a right to autonomy over where their donations go. Their first response to this comes in third, that says that actually you have an obligation to the state to back you and the obligation to save more lives. That's not true. We told you right from first, you already fulfill this obligation in terms of paying taxes. Second, the fact that team proposition is unwilling to make everyone donate all of their wealth to charity indicates to us that at some point, the autonomy to decide what you do with your money is more important than practical outcomes. So if they don't want to make everyone donate all of their money, I would suggest that this principle is enough to win us the debate independent of practical outcomes. The second thing they say is that you have information asymmetry. Again, why is this unique to their side? When we publish all the information about these charities, this information asymmetry is gone. So they don't actually have an active response. Closest thing can credit them to a response, no thank you, is this policy caveat of giving to charities with the same issues. Actually, it's still different. And note that their third speaker's response is really just asserting they are the same. Gareth explains to you that in reality, charities don't do the same thing. Here's an example. There are many Black Lives Matter charities, but they're all different. Some post bail for protesters. Some give money directly to the families of police brutality victims. Some hire legal defenders to get people out of mandatory minimums. Some lobby senators like the ACLU. All of them are different causes, but proposition will just throw money in between them. We didn't only give you examples, we gave you structural reasons. Gareth told you that charities don't want to compete with each other. That's why you never see two soup kitchens on the same street corner, because people recognize that charities need to diversify in order to help the most people. Moreover, they could easily have ideological differences, like the difference between religious and secular soup kitchens, for example. So we gave you structural analysis and examples, no thank you, as to why they wouldn't be able to allocate to the same cause. This policy caveat, by the way, which is the extent of the response to our principle in first and second, doesn't stand. Even if you ignore all that, Gareth explains this as a concession. And note that there are three reasons that of third speaker missed the point. The point of this concession was, for example, if the top mental health charity spends more on bureaucracy and therefore is less efficient than the top earthquake relief charity, surely by their case, they should reallocate that money. If they say you can weigh between dignity, if they say that bureaucracy is bad, surely they should allocate it out of the cause. The fact they didn't was a concession. That's not the thing they respond to. No, thank you. Finally, they say, so we've taken on this logic on, it just fulfills your baseline desire. Because many people don't have just a baseline desire. They want a specific thing out of that cause. The static line from third speaker makes no sense, because we've proven to you that even if it's within the same area, it's still a slightly different cause, and therefore it is still a different choice. No, thank you. What is the impact of all of this? Our principle stands at the end of the debate. We've proven to you that these things are still different choices, even if they are broadly the same cause. And given that we've taken their only responses in third speaker, we've shown you that this principle is enough to win us the debate, independent of practical outcomes. Second, do they decrease the total amount of charitable donations? Matthew gives you two structural reasons why the total amount of donations decreases in their world, and it's not marginal, but rather likely to be a lot. The first is that many people donate because they are passionate about a specific cause or charity. We finally get a decent response in third. The first thing you say is that actually you don't donate because you're a good person. You donate because you want to assuage your guilt. First, this is an assertion, like he says so. Second, this is actually not true. I'm really sorry if Team Canada is like that, but I think that I want to believe that many people in the world are good people. Many people in the world want to repay this thing. Even if it's assuaging guilt, often you want to repay the charity that helped you. Matthew gives you an example. I think the reason that many school shooting victims, no thank you, donate and set up charities specifically towards school shooting victims in the future shows you that even if you want to assuage your guilt, you still want to donate to a specific cause. Next, responses 2 and 3 of that third speaker are predicated on reallocating within the same cause. We've taken that down. Their last analysis is that emergency donations happen in any ways. That's not true because you get no advertising on their side. So this leads us to the second structural reason, that they decrease the incentive for charities to advertise. Their sense is that states advertise for you. No, thank you. No, that's not true. That's our mechanism. Their mechanism is the state will just reallocate by itself. Our mechanism is the state publishes the raw information. But secondly, I think that this advertising is so much more than just a list of effectiveness. It's why the people are in need. Like when you see charity or videos, you talk about the minorities or the victims in need. You talk about the dire plight that they're in. Often this advertising is extremely impactful, even if people just want to assuage their guilt and pretend like they're good people. So this advertising doesn't exist on their side of the house. Charities don't want to hold on because charities don't want to spend money on that. They instead want to spend money on things that the state will consider more effective. So for these two structural reasons, they do decrease the total amount of charitable donations. Before I move on, yes.
Almost all of these responses are dependent on the same misinterpretation of the prop model. Of course, we're fine with cross allocation. The point is that it will be incredibly rare because it's highly unlikely that there are no cancer charities that are reasonably effective beyond our metrics. So please engage with the actual model in the round.
So I think I've given you a lot of analysis as to why, even if you allocate within the same cause, there are likely to be very different things that the charities do. Second, their burden is not just to prove that cancer research is effective. They have to say they allocate it to the most effective person if they want to stand for their benefits. So finally, do they really save more lives? Garrett's representative argues to you that they allow states with political interest to determine which charities are most effective. They give two responses in their third. The first is independent third parties. Come on, guys. Who do you think chooses these third parties to even be the ones who decide? It's states. You think about the developing world, 3/4 of the world where corrupt governments are going to appoint third parties that look suspiciously similar to the king's cousin, for example. Even in democracies, who do you think Trump is going to choose? I expect he's going to choose a much more conservative organization than a liberal one. The second thing they say is that oppressive governments will do this anyway. This is a non-response. We agree. But we think that giving them one more mechanism to do it is bad. Moreover, given they concede that this mitigates all their benefits, our analysis isn't just that oppressive governments will be more oppressive, is that they get no benefits because they don't allocate this money properly. Next, even if we take them at their best, as states are completely objective, they don't help the most people. They say that charities have better incentive to cut down on bureaucracy. We pointed out that our mechanism was the same because we are able to publish this information. Why? On their side, you pressure the charity to reduce staffing costs because you want your money to make a greater difference and not get allocated elsewhere. On our side, you also pressure the charity to reduce staffing costs because because you want your money to actually go to making a difference to the people on the ground. They say that actually the public doesn't have time to decide. Actually, we didn't say that it was a visceral gut emotion that made you donate. That was your case, so don't misrepresent us. We said that actually the public does want their money to go to the most effective place possible, and therefore they have every incentive to look through it. And look, it's not the public looking through the financial records. There are third-party organizations like Effective Altruism that they mentioned that can do this on our side of the house as well. Finally, they say that sometimes charities have too much money. We showed you the example of Red Cross was false. They didn't come back to it. But the second example is Black Lives Matter. For many, these charities are absolute necessity, not just for bail, but for legal advocacy, for pressuring legislators. If their argument is that incarcerated minorities have too much money, I don't think that's a good argument at all. But secondly, we showed you that even if they do, these charities have no incentive to hoard all the money because it doesn't look good for the image if you hoard a food truck full of food instead of giving it to the victims. So even if they are the most effective actors, they are far more likely to just give it to smaller charities who are far better to do it. The case of the opposition has been clear. Most of the benefits that proposition tell you have nothing to do with emotion and just publishing more information. We protect the moral right to choice and we get more effective donations. That's why charity is not just about numbers, it's about giving hope, meaning, and dignity to individuals. We're very proud to oppose.
Okay, I'd like to thank the speaker for the speech and start with replies. We'll start with opposition. Here.
Sorry, can everyone hear me if I speak like this? All right. At the end of this debate, it's crucial to look at the action of side proposition to see why they've lost. At the start of this debate, first was a bit vague. Maybe they would have gone within the movement, maybe they'd go all over the place. She didn't really specify a model, but based on her examples, they probably would go all over the place. When we pushed him in first opposition, they subtly committed to it. He said, we can do this. When I questioned them why this wasn't a contradiction and gave a bunch of reasons as to why this wasn't possible, third proposition finally concedes. He says, this is our main response to all of your challenges, which is we will do it within the movement. It's worth noting even then that this doesn't deal with the specificity. If I was a former Black Lives Matter protester who believes that people who are going into jail without bail is an important issue, that is my right. If I believe that one charity has a better ideology than another, that is my right. But it's also worth noting that if this is their argument, and the massive overclaims at the end of this debate about misallocations of resources, about structural issues of poverty, don't change on both sides of the house. In which case, you buy opposition's counter policy, which is so much better for this. Let's take a look at the two worlds that emerge at the end of this debate. And I want to show to you why the world of the proposition did nothing else but strip individuals from their ability to make choices, to donate to causes that care about them. It was a world where the notion of effectiveness was incredibly nebulous. It was quality life years. Like, what's quality? Who knows? Proposition clearly doesn't. They haven't defined it for us. But also, this misses the point. The point is that if it's my money, I have a right based on my relation to decide what is most important. And in the world of the proposition, they say no. That takes away, and they say, actually, it's the obligation of the state. When we explained to you why this wasn't the case, all proposition did was say, well, it doesn't matter. We get more effectiveness. But when we pointed out that the notion of effectiveness was a nebulous metric, they had absolutely no response. They just reasserted that we could. And at the end of this debate, proposition's world continuously shrank. In the world of the proposition, we said that the best charities don't get donations. Why? Because we gave you structural reasons why charities that care about things that are important, like mental health, are going to be less effective via their metric. We didn't get a response on their side of the house. But also, proposition's world doesn't solve the problems that they set out with. If there are issues with people wasting funds, then the problem is to break corruption, not necessarily to expose and reallocate. And that doesn't change on their side of the house, by the way, because then it's just the most efficient of the inefficient charities in their world. So proposition's world does barely anything. But all it does is disincentivize individuals from donating who don't feel any certainty that the causes that they care about matter. All it does is strip individuals of the right to make choices that they care about. And at the end of this debate, proposition had a mechanistic quibble that didn't save their case. Let's talk to you about the world of the opposition. Now, we recognize in the world of the opposition that the status quo of charities isn't perfect. But what did we do instead? We gave you a number of counter incentives why it's getting better. We talked to you about the rise of social media. We explained to you why when people take personal ownership, they are more likely to call out these charities and ask them for a difference. We explained to you why people who care about these charities are likely to be in the vast majority of this debate, because people who drop 50 cents on a tin can when a Greenpeace volunteer really pressures them don't tend to be the majority of these donations. We explained to you that if people care about these donations, the policy of releasing this information and allowing them to make this judgment on their own is a perfectly fair way of doing this. We explained to you that if charities wanted to help people, they would do this, and they would do as much as possible on our side of the house as well. So this argument about collective action is non-specific to opposition's world. But what we had on opposition was a number of things. One, we increased the incentive of individuals to donate. Two, we didn't allow governments with their subjective metrics to make this judgment. He says, but this is going to be a corrupt autocracy. Look, Trump is not in a dictatorship, but he'll probably still make this judgment anyway. There's no reason why this third party is perfect. At the heart of this debate is a really very simple question. If you care about something, do you have the right to make it better? The case of the opposition is that if you have a friend, a mother, a brother, or a cousin who has a specific cause, that's your right to do so. And it's not such proposition who hasn't proven their metric to be able to do so. We believe that charity is not about numbers, it's about hope and dignity. We oppose.
Okay, I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech, and to wrap up the debate, let's call our proposition reply. Here.
Can everyone hear me? In this debate, side opposition's narrative was as such, that charity is not about numbers, but rather hope and meaning. We told you from the beginning of this debate that this mindset is precisely what leads to the blind faith of ineffective charities that do not fulfill the most predominant individual desire, which is to address the issues these charities are built for. On that basis, I'm going to talk about a couple of things in this round. First of all, I'm just going to note strategically at the top of this debate that their whole case is actually dependent on one central characterization, that people have a very close and intimate connection with the charity itself, that it needs to be through this charity, because that's the reason underlying their first and second argument, that this undermines individual choice because you want it through that charity, and second of all, if it's not going to that charity, you're less likely to donate. So insofar as we have proven in this round that that is not as strong of a desire as they say, then both of their claims fall out and we can win on efficacy. So I'm going to prove why we did that in this debate, first on our theme about talking about their world and why we don't undermine this choice. First of all, we talked about from the beginning why it is not the charity itself that is most important to individuals, but rather the cause. That not all individuals, and the vast majority, do not have the story and background of one charity to which they are beholden to. Whatever comes at the top is the one they donate to. That's why we, UNICEF and Red Cross, are overwhelmingly the charities that we're talking about in this debate. So even in the small cases they talked about, where it is a smaller charity, where you have a very intimate connection because they saved your mother's life or did something for you, that funding is still likely going to go there if that individual smaller charity is so effective. We're talking about the big charities to which individual choice is not actually as strong as they'd like to say. So we say that they're still likely going to donate and their choice is not going to be undermined because the cause is most important to them. That the strongest preference of individuals donating is not which charity goes about doing the donations, but it's about which one actually gets the job done. We talked about why we can still have the charities that they wanted on their side, like mental health institutions are immensely important and we can still have that, but rather charities that donate on the most effective lines, so suicide lines that they wanted to talk about can still exist in our world because they do really impact individuals. So we've proven why choice in this debate is not undermined to such an extent, still given that their individual donations are still going to the cause, which is the most important. But even if there's a trade-off in this debate, we would better take efficacy over that because that fulfills the most predominant individual desire, which is to solve the issue, not for we to have this money, but for we to actually do something about it. So given that, let's talk about donations versus efficacy and the trade-off in this debate. We told you that our metrics were not perfect, but they were far better than the status quo, where bureaucracy and ineffective allocation of funds have not enabled a resolution of all of these issues. And it cannot be solved by their flimsy counterstance. We told you why the average individual sees their marketing more than the financial audits. People don't have time to compare CEO compensations and the complexity of financial audits, and that whatever backlash exists is temporary and goes away because individuals still have more faith in the visibility of these larger charities than the unknown, nicher, and smaller charities that they wanted to say would benefit on their side. But finally, they also never chose to engage with the frame of our second argument, which is that in the face of specific trends, many individuals default to donating to specific charities. So the fact that the Red Cross had $500 million after an earthquake in Haiti, that no charity in this debate will be effective enough at using all of their funds to the maximum capacity. And then on our side of the house, we would slightly concede decreased choice of that individual who wanted the funds to Red Cross if it meant that it could be spread out to local charities that could help the very communities that the individual donating wants to protect. So in this debate, it is very clear what opposition has in this debate is a marginal win on principle that individuals have a know and want to where their money can go. But we say that that individual's autonomy and ability to control where their property goes is not as important as the actual resolution of these issues and saving saving of the lives that we can have on our side of the house when we finally ensure that charities are spreading out their resources properly, that bureaucracy is cut down from large donors who want to ensure that their money stay with that charity and ensure as an active, natural pressure on the individual organization to change. What we get on our side of the house is more lives being saved, not just the flimsy idea of having hope and meaning behind something that will never manifest on their side. For all of those reasons, I'm very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank both teams for a wonderful debate. You can cross the floor, shake hands virtually, make friends, chit chat, and we'll be back soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Team Canada, for the debate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Team Canada.
Thank you.
Year after year, the World Schools Debating Championship gathers the best debaters from around the globe. This year's pandemic made that impossible, so we took it online.